Okay. Just a reminder of what we went through in previous sessions. If you still remember the first session after the introduction, we went through how or where you find some announcements for faculty positions. And then we talked about the session after, we also talked about how to understand faculty positions or announcements, what we mean by different statements within that faculty announcement. And then last time we talked about how to prepare a CV for a faculty position. We mentioned a few things. If you still remember, we start by name. Oops. That's my other laptop, don't worry. We start by name and contact information, and then education, and then publication or research, and then teaching, and then service, basically. And again, as we mentioned last time, an academic CV is really a detailed CV. Just make sure that it is well presented. If you are one of the new ones that have not been in the workshop before, the video I believe that we had for the last 3 sessions are already on that Facebook page. So you can actually watch them if you would like to. Now, what I want to talk about a little bit today is research statement. How do we basically prepare a research statement? If you take a look at this list, when we talked about generally what is required for a faculty position based on the announcements, they require basically a cover letter, a CV, teaching statement, research statement, and references. And again, that's what most academic positions require. We talked about the CV, and then today we'll talk about the research statement. Hopefully next time we'll talk about the teaching statement, and then the time after that we'll go for a cover letter. So let's get going with the research statement. One of the main things that people are looking for in the research statement is, or what you really need to be careful when you start writing your research statement. Now you're starting to think of research beyond your dissertation. What is the research that I would like to work on within the next few years? And it has to be, it gives the search committee or the hiring committee, sometimes they call it, but I think most of the time it's called search committee. It gives them the ability to just to see, can you think beyond what you've done in your PhD? And can you also, can that candidate think beyond what his or her advisor is doing? So generally, the research statement, if you take a look at the second bullet point, basically says or summarizes what research areas you're working on, what have you been doing recently, or what are you doing currently. And then they would like to see what is your future plan and what is the contribution for that future plan. And again, you want to write it in a way, maybe that your future research plan should kind of logically follow what you currently or you have done before. So this is what I do. This is what I have been doing, and here is my research plan within that research area, for example. But again, it has to be different, and you need to tell them why it is important, the ideas, and it has to be also innovative for research. And that innovative is very important, and we'll come back to that next slide, because in the next slide we'll talk about not only you're mentioning these things, but you're also, if possible, mentioning funding agencies. That again, similar to other things about future plans, it tells basically the search committee that not only you thought about different research projects or research areas than your dissertation, but you also have some ideas about where that research is going to be funded. And we'll mention that in the next slide. And again, the whole thing should tell basically the search committee, what is your research area, what have you done, and what is your plan? And they will get an idea about, is this person going to be able to get funding or not? And again, it is also nice, and we'll mention that also in the next slide, it will give the search committee an idea if this person can, will, or interested in collaborating with faculty from the same department or other departments at that university. That's also important, and we will see that from the couple of examples I will share. So again, to summarize, basically, what are the major problems you would like to work on? It's a general plan. They're not going to hold you to that plan when you arrive there, but it's a general vision for what you would like to work on for the next 3 to 5 years. As I mentioned, funding agencies. If you mention, this is, for example, a research that I'm planning to submit proposal to this or this, and or basically funding agency. Again, it just gives the impression to the committee that you really thought not only about future research ideas, but also where you're submitting some of these research proposals. And you don't want to focus on one area of research. If possible, to divide it at least into 2 areas, because again, you should have a backup plan. What if that research area is not funded? What if enough specific organization have funded enough research in that area and now they want to move on? So you want to make sure you have not only one goal or one research area, but multiple ones. And again, as you're writing these different research areas, whenever you think, a lot of research we do now is a collaborative research. Most of the research I work on, I cannot do really by myself with my students. It is basically collaborative. Sometimes I need people from mechanical engineering. Sometimes I need to collaborate with people from biology, bioengineering, you name it, all kinds of different fields. If the research areas you're working on are having this collaborative goals, or it is a collaborative research, mention that you're interested in collaborating with others. And also, if you, for example, mention departments in that university, that would be good. I don't see people mentioning names usually, because you still don't know the people, whatever, all of that. But I think mentioning that I would like to collaborate with, for example, researchers or faculty from that department or something, since this is a collaborative research, that's totally fine, and is actually a good thing to mention. How long this is usually? Most of the time we see it 1 to 2 pages. Sometimes you see it longer if it is a more senior faculty, but it's about 1 to 2 pages. You don't want to have just one full page of text. You want to divide it into current research, future research, maybe have subheadings for different research areas too. Make sure you read it very carefully. Have somebody else read it. I think the most, or I would think that the best resource in this case would be your advisor. Hopefully all of you have very good relationships with your advisors, as well as other faculty that you know well, for example, or other people that you trust that have gotten faculty positions. And again, proofread this several times just to make sure it is really well written. You need to be concise. You could describe your research maybe in 15 pages, but we're really talking about 1 to 2, maximum 3 pages. So you need to be clear. Here is the research areas I've been working on. This is what I have done. This is my future plan to expand on what you have done previously, and your vision about collaboration as well as funding agencies or funding opportunities. If you worked with somebody else, especially if it is a very well-known name, acknowledge the collaboration with these people by name. That's totally fine. If people see you that you have actually worked with somebody who is really well-known in the field, that's a plus. It helps you. It doesn't really hurt you. They could easily pick up the phone and call that person. Hopefully you've already left a very good impression on that person. So that's also acknowledging others people. Collaboration and work is always important. Again, you have to have the sense as you read this that you're thinking about these things not because your advisor is working on these things. You're thinking about these things as an independent researcher. And that comes from looking at what other people are doing, not only your advisor. If you go to conferences, you would actually attending some presentations, you will see what other people are doing. They may mention a couple of future research in these presentations. So you could formulate your own vision of future research based on presentations you watch or the reading you do. I will try to go through the same two students that we went through their CVs last time. So I want to go through their research statements just so you could see how some of these things were mentioned in the research statement and how organized it is. Hopefully I'll be able to find those files here. Okay. Can you see a PDF file on the screen? Or it's still, okay. So I'll stop sharing and start sharing again. Hopefully it will show up. Unless Nina would like to give us an advice here.
No, it's the best. عشان أنت عامل share لون application, I think لازم تعمل كل السكرين عشان يبين كل شيء.
That's what I'm talking about. So share basically desktop instead of sharing an application, right?
Hello?
Yep.
How about now? Can you see a PDF file?
Yes.
Okay, good. So this is a research statement for one of my students. This is for Thomas or Highland. I just want to go through a few comments and then you guys can ask whatever questions you want. So if you take a look at what we have here, how do we make this bigger? Okay. Anyway, I'll keep it as it is. I don't want to. Okay. If you take a look at the way it's organized, it basically says research statement. The first paragraph, it basically tells people what research he has been working on. And then 3 different areas, if you notice, number 1, number 2, number 3, clearly mentioned. So you cannot be mistaken about what he has been working on. And then the next sentence is future plan about these research areas or the research areas Thomas was interested in working on. And if you notice, he mentions 2 research areas, and then he discussed these 2 research areas in the research statement. So the first research area, again, he used subheadings to make sure that it's clearly divided so people can easily see what he has done, what is his future plan. So, for example, if you notice here, the first research area, his contributions, and toward the end of that contribution, he basically mentions a collaboration with one of the faculty members. The research that Thomas worked on was an NSF research funded project where I collaborated with Ed Kevazanjian from Arizona State University. We submitted the proposal together, it got funded, we did our part here at Lehigh, Ed did, and his students did his part at Arizona State, but at the end we also did one part kind of common, combining the 2 efforts, and that one large scale experiment was actually done here at Lehigh. So Thomas had good interaction with Ed Kevazanjian through that project. And it was very important mentioning Ed. Ed is very well known, not only in the US, but all around the world in geotechnical engineering or in my research area. Before Thomas, a couple of years or maybe more than Thomas started applying for faculty positions, Ed was elected or selected to be on the National Academy. So he's basically well known nationally, not only in civil engineering, but being on the National Academy, that's basically the highest achievement you could get. So mentioning his name in this case and that he collaborated with him is also very good, and it was actually one of his references. So again, it catches the eye of the people who are reading your application. And that was something that was really good for Thomas, that it worked really for him very well. And let's jump to the next paragraph, where we're basically talking about future plan. And again, it's a future plan for that specific research area. So he talked about his contribution in the first paragraph, and then the future plan, he talks about future contributions. And you will say that he's talking about multi-scale experiments and framework. He also mentions, if you notice in this sentence, it is envisioned that this is an interdisciplinary research program. That's basically an introduction to tell people this is something that I cannot do by myself. I need to collaborate with other people. And he specifically mentions, for example, here, people from biological, environmental, as well as civil engineering. So not only my own research, but I'm thinking of bigger ideas that I can collaborate with other people on these ideas. And if you take a look at the end there, where that funding is coming from, I will target, for example, Department of Energy, National Science Foundation, Housing and Urban Development. Those are different funding agencies that can fund, or it has to be realistic, the funding agencies you're mentioning, because remember, people who are reading your application, their faculty, they have been submitting proposals for a long time. They know what funding agencies and what topics these funding agencies are basically supporting. So the funding agency you mentioned has to fit basically the topic that you're discussing. And then if you keep going down, you'll see the same thing, the second research area. What is the contribution? What is the future plan? And again, in that future plan, he mentions collaboration as well as funding agency. For Thomas, his research statement was 1 page. Thomas, if you still remember, I think we mentioned last time, he did his PhD here at Lehigh. He worked for a company for a couple of years after that. And then he went back into academia. So he did not do a postdoc, and his research statement was 1 page. Currently, he's at Louisiana State University. Again, feel free to ask questions anytime, but if none, let me open the second one. And that second one, oops, where did it go?
مهند
تفضل.
يعطيك العافية. هلا سؤال بخصوص
I cannot hear you well. Can you speak up a little bit?
اوكي هيك الصوت احسن؟
Yeah.
اوكي. هلا بالفقرة الأولى الأوفر فيو أو خلينا نحكي الريسيرش اكسبيرينس. إذا كان واحد مثلا عنده بأكثر من يعني عنده ريسيرش اكسبيرينس بأكثر من مجال، هل لازم يذكرهم كلهم ولا يذكر بس اللي هم تارجتنج البوزيشن اللي رايح عليه؟ يعني مثلا I'm applying for certain thing that يعني أحط الشيء اللي match their interest ولا كل الاكسبيرينس اللي أنا عندي موجودة؟
My suggestion for the first paragraph, since it's a kind of an overview, mention your research experience, because you never know. Some people who are in the search committee could be interested in something that they're not really, it's not in the announcement. So it may catch somebody else that sees an opportunity for collaboration in that specific area. So my suggestion in this case would be to mention that research area in the first paragraph. And then if you think if their announcement is mainly focused on a couple of other research areas, but it's related to what you've done before, you can focus on these ones in details for these 2 paragraphs below that, where you mention basically your contribution. If you notice, for example, in the previous one, and I don't know if Thomas did it because of that or not, I don't remember now the reason, but if you take a look here, he mentions 3 research areas, but he only expanded on 2. Maybe because they were interested in these 2 research areas. Honestly, I don't remember now. But I think something like that, if somebody is interested in the other research area you mentioned, you're not really losing. I think you're not losing anything. I think you will be gaining by mentioning that research area. Does that answer your question?
يب تمام شكرا.
Thank you. Anybody else?
دكتور محمد.
تفضل.
اوكي في مجال مثلا نعمل بالاوفرفيو انه مثلا I have been awarded like let's say outstanding research graduate students for example او مثلا stipend grant research from center for example for covering $10,000 for example for specific research. Can we mention that?
Is this something you worked on ولا مثلا الفunding كان جاي للadvisor؟
لا يعني I worked on. So I like for example I submitted a proposal to like just support my research and I got stipend fund with the $10,000.
You could, is it a research area you're interested in to work on the future?
Yes.
Yeah, you could actually mention it under current contributions.
Okay.
في contributions تحت. I would not really mention it in the overview. I would like to keep that overview very short to the point. Here are the research areas I'm working on, and then you basically expand on that. So for example, I would mention in that contributions or previous experience, I would mention that experience under that research area. It's good that it's mentioned here. It's also could be important to mention something like that in the cover letter, and we will come back to the cover letter when we talk about it too. It has to show up in your CV too. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, thanks.
مهند.
تفضل.
إذا تسمح لي، من خبرتك كونك كنت في أكثر من سيرش كوميتي والخبرة العامة، يعني هاي الأشياء مبين إنها منظمة بشكل رائع وبتساعد القارئ على إنه يرتب طريقة القراءة والأفكار، بس إحنا بنعرف ما في تمبلت معينة صح؟ ولا من الخبرة أنت بتحس إنه في نوع معين من الريسيرش ستيتمنت إذا ترتب بالشيء بهذا الشكل، يعني في جنرال ترند صار خلينا نحكي، هذا بيساعد يكون أحسن من انها تنكتب على شكل اسيه. يعني انا اخر ريسيرش ستيتمنت كتبتها بشكل اسيه، يعني مقدمه وجنرال بادي وبعدين خاتمه. هل صار في جنرال ترند او a kind of a template لكتابه الريسيرش ستيتمنت؟
And there is no one specific template. I think you want to think about it. What is the most effective way of writing my research experience and plan that would make it easy for people to see my contributions and my future plan? So when I worked with Thomas and Sean on their plan or on their faculty applications, I think using subheadings, clearly mentioning or numbering as we see in these, is the most effective way of just clearly identifying. For example, if somebody wants to read just your future plan, and again, remember, we on search committees, let's assume I'm on a search committee. I think the last one I was on, we have like, I don't know, 150 applicants. I don't really have time to read 150 applicants in details. If I am really interested, I would go to the CV, look at few things in the CV, go to the research statement, look at few things in the research statement. If I write it as an essay, you're basically telling everybody on the search committee, you have to read the whole thing to find the information you're looking for. But if it's clearly identified, it tells them that you have a future plan, you already have an idea about funding agencies. It would just basically makes it much easier. And I think it just gives a better impression about the applicant in general. It's well organized, well thought out, and it gives an idea that, oh, these guys know how, this person know how to write clearly and concisely. Because again, remember, this is also a writing sample. If you know how to write clearly, concisely, mention the important information, and it is very clearly organized, you're going to do the same thing in your research proposals, which is basically a very important thing for academic positions. So I would advise doing something similar to this. Subheadings, research contributions, future plans. It just makes it much easier for people who are reviewing the application.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, let's go to the next one. And again, the next one, you see the same thing. This is a longer research statement. I like this one because he added his name and everything. The other one, Thomas submitted his application. I think it was required to be submitted as one document, so he doesn't have to worry about this. But if you are submitting them as multiple documents, adding your name either in the header or the footer at the bottom is really important. To just, again, just a thing for organizing. Again, you see the same thing, but Sean did about a year. He did a few months of postdoc here with me, and then he went somewhere else for a postdoc. So he had more experience, more research experience. So his research statement, if you notice in here, you'll see it is about 2 pages. It's a little bit longer since he has longer experience. So he basically had more contributions, as well as maybe better future plan, given that he's already been exposed to different people doing research. So you will notice in here, he did the same thing. And we I like that format, just as I mentioned previously, answering the previous question. Here is the research areas he worked on. And a nice thing he says about future research, if you notice here, which is we mentioned in the slides, for future research, I plan to build on what I have been doing, which is really good because you're building on what you learned, and then you're basically expanding. And he mentions a few research areas to build on for future research. And again, he has an ultimate goal about bridging the gap, or basically adding, creating new knowledge for these specific research areas. And again, you will see that we follow almost the same thing. What are the research contributions? Here he used numbering. So this is the research area number 1. Here is my contributions. And if you noticed, in that research area, he has not only contribution in one specific research area, but more than one contribution within that research area. So he had, for example, this first one highlighted as here is one contribution within that research area of the solid structure interaction. Here is a second contribution where he did some field testing with dynamic foundations, so that's the second contribution within that research area, but they're clearly separated by that bold text or a title. And then here is 1.2 is the basically future plan within that research area. And again, you see something similar. He actually specifically identifies to investigate these specific research areas, because it was defined previously that these still need to be investigated. And again, I would like to extend my experience to other research areas. And then if you notice, I envision this, and he basically talks about collaboration with other people from other areas, as well as funding agencies. So similar to what we've done, what Thomas have done in the previous one, but again, this is slightly longer since Sean had a little bit more experience. And then he talks about future research areas research area number 2. Again, contributions as well as future plan. Same thing, you mention contribution, and then you mention collaboration, as well as if there is any future funding. You'll notice that Sean, toward the end, did his own, like a separate section for funding, and we will see that, and that could be possible too. Third research area, and then we're basically talking about potential collaboration and future funding. And you will see that he mentions his previous experience working on interdisciplinary research, his previous experience working with industry partners as well as academic partners. And then toward the end, he basically builds on that experience and collaboration and mentioning funding agencies. So that's roughly what, oops, where am I? That's roughly what you see in these different applications. Oops. How do I get back to this PowerPoint? So again, we talked about Thomas as well as Sean experience and their research statement. In this, I also actually was looking online Initially, my plan was actually to show this on a separate screen because my setup that I use with my work laptop has like 3 screens, but now I'm working from 1 screen. But I can actually put these, the PDF file maybe of this PowerPoint presentation on the Facebook group. There are actually 3 of them. The first one is a PDF file that clearly shows how to write a research statement. You may find slightly different advice, but I gave you an advice based on my experience, my student experience, as well as what I have seen being on search committees. So these are really very useful links to, so for example, let me see if I could easily click on this and where would it go? Can you see the website? That PDF file? I don't know if that's the PDF file or not, but yeah. So this is from Carnegie Mellon. It talks about how to write a research statement. Again, talks about being an independent researcher, as well as start on short-term and long-term. I don't like to call them short-term and long-term personally, but some people do include short-term and long-term research goals. I personally think that you just need to have general idea about the research areas, research projects, as well as funding. Because again, once you arrive there, things may change totally. So what else do I have here? What is my PowerPoint?
Nina, can you rewrite the link? It's broken, it did not open.
Oh, really? We'll,
Yeah, I just posted the one that's working. If it doesn't work, try to refresh عشان هو بحمل PDF file.
Oh yeah, it's working right now. Thank you.
So where is my... Okay, let me just... Okay. Okay. Sorry for this. What else do I have? I think that's most of the discussion that I want to go through. I added toward the end a couple of slides that I just thought I'll go through them if needed, but it's basically talking about the same thing. And again, who can help? The last thing is your advisor or other faculty that you trust. A lot of times, different universities, if you're currently a student or at a US university, they have career services. Some of them could actually help with faculty applications. Not all universities have that, but some universities do. Do a lot of, I think if you do even just simple Google searches, you may find other resources other than the ones that I mentioned. But I did that, and I also didn't want to overload you guys with a lot of things. I thought I only included the links that I believe were really useful. They're really good, well written. The third link may not be as great, but the first 2 are really good. That's all what I have. The last couple of slides were just basically like a sample that I found also from UPenn, where they mention what, same thing, current research and then future research, basically, if you want to think about it that way too. But if you want, I could include all of these slides just to make sure you have the links on the Facebook page. That's all what I have on the presentation.